Hello my dear friends, you're on the Military Summary channel, and today we will discuss the situation in Ukraine on the 28th of January of 2023. Today we have a lot of very interesting updates, so let's start. And first we're going to start with the Zaporizhzhia area, with Zaporizhzhia and South Donetsk area, or the second front of Zaporizhzhia. When talking about the western part of the Zaporizhzhia front line, there are no changes in this area. The Ukrainians continue accumulation of their forces. The Russians are doing the same, and also there are very powerful artillery duels in this area, and as a result of those artillery duels, the Ukrainian lost a few ammo depot in this area, and just a few positions were attacked by the Russian artillery, but without any changes on the ground. When talking about the East Zaporizhzhia front line, or this front line used to be South Donetsk front line, as you can see, there are still very heavy clashes around Vuhledar. The Russians continue the storming process of this town. The Ministry of Defense of Russian Federation reported that as a result of clashes during the previous 24 hours, the Ukrainians lost around 70 soldiers, 7 armored vehicles, and 3 artillery systems in this area. One D-20 howitzer, another D-30 howitzer, another Gvozdika. Also, the Ukrainians lost 2 warehouses or ammo depot in this area. As you can see, the Ukrainians still controls Vuhledar. The Russians still haven't entered inside the town, but you need to understand that the Russians are not planning to do this because they will be reduced. If they decide to enter the town, the Russians want, as we discussed many times, they want to block this town from the north, from the west, from the east. They want to cut Vuhledar from the Ukrainian base, the base of 72nd Mechanized Brigade that located in this salt mine, in this coal mine. And then they need to keep this town in blockade for some days, for maybe weeks, and as soon as the Ukrainian forces in Vuhledar are out of ammo and shells, then the Russians will start the storm process. Today, the Russians reported that they managed to destroy, and they published video of some commandos, Ukrainian commandos in this area, who were sent in direction of Pavlovka. Furthermore, the Russians published a video of their attack using the flamethrower system TOS-1A in direction of this industrial area. Also, the Russians published video of captured Ukrainian prisoners of war in this residential area. Also, the Russians published some episodes of their attack in direction of this salt mine along these brushes. From the Ukrainian side, to stop and slow down the Russians, the Ukrainians using HIMARS, they're attacking the Russian back position, the reserves in the towns like Petrovka, Kirillovka, Novoandreevka, Valerianovka. So in the Russian back, they try to attack the reserves, their warehouses, and so on. When talking about Vuhledar, the storming process still continues. When talking about the Ukrainians, the defense operation still continues, and it's very difficult. It's a very important area. And I believe that the Russians sooner or later are able to take this town, but for now we see what we see. When talking about Marinka, there are still heavy clashes in Marinka. The Russian sources map has been updated. Now they colored in red the north area. This territory used to be in the gray zone, or just under Ukrainian control. When talking about colors, as you can see, there are still big part of Marinka under Ukrainian control. 35th Brigade still there, Ukrainian. They're successfully protected the western part of Marinka, and but let's see. Sooner or later, Marinka is going to fall as well. But when talking about this current situation, the Russians complete and finish the thing they wanted. They cut the towns like Konstantinov, Krasnogorovka, and Konstantinovka. They established fire control over this cross. They established control over this road, and now the Ukrainian lost another road to supply and support the Ukrainian forces, who's located in Konstantinovka and also in Vuhledar as well. So they made some successful development that brought some success, some benefit for the Russian army that attacks Vuhledar from the south. When talking about Peski front line, as you can see, there are a lot of icons in this area, and during the day the Russians reported that they were trying to develop their offensive operation in direction of Severna and Toninka, these two towns. If you remember, a few days ago, they reported that the Russians managed to establish control over these trenches, over this hill, and starting today they're moving further to the north in direction of Tonivka and Severne. When talking about Donetsk, the Ukrainians lost around 30 soldiers, 3 armored vehicles, and around 6 artillery systems. They lost 1 Grad system, 1 P1, 1 Getsin B, 2 Msta B howitzers, and 1 M777 artillery system. And also, the Russians managed to destroy another radar in this area. So, as you can see, the Russians moved to the north, and the main thing that the Russians want to achieve by this attack, and I believe that they're not counting their losses, they need to get and to establish control over Severna and over Tonivka. And if the Russians are able to do this, if the Russians are able to establish control, there is a road through Vadiana, this one. The Russians will be able to supply and support their forces in Tonivka and Severna easily with this road, and also using these brushes, they will be able to establish some fortification, and from Tonivka, the Russians will be able to establish physical artillery control over Orlovka, over this cross. And if the Russians are able to do this, we can start talk about some kind of operational encirclement, because this is the only road that Ukrainians have to supply Avdiivka frontline. Don't forget that these days the Russians are trying to develop their offensive operation in direction of Novobakhmutovka, Krasnogorovka, Veselaya, and to cut or to short the distance from the Russian position to the railroad and to create the encirclement situation on the north of Avdiivka. So the Russians activated on this front line. It is very interesting because the thing is that the possible attack from the south in direction of Vuhledar opens the Russians the way to attack and to move further in direction of Kurakhova. But Kurakhova is not the main town. The Russians needed to pass by Kurakhova and move further to the north in direction of Pokrovsk. And the attack in direction of Avdiivka means that if the Russians attack in direction of Kurakhova and then in direction of Pokrovsk, we can say about attempt of encirclement of Ukrainian forces who is located in Kurakhova area, Kurakhova, Marinka, and Avdiivka. But attack in direction of Avdiivka means that maybe the Russians don't have such big plans, and maybe they just want to get in direction of Kurakhova and not to develop their offensive operation further to Pokrovsk. So maybe they want to create a little bit less, not so big encirclement as if when talking comparisons Pokrovsk. Maybe the Russians just don't have manpower for this big operation. Don't forget that there are a lot of trenches and fortifications. So the situation that develops in this area is very interesting. Now let's move to Bakhmut, Artyomovsk. As you can see, there are also a lot of icons in this area. The icons are all over the front line, and furthermore, the Russian source map has been updated. The Russians entered the northeast part of Artyomovsk, this one that located in the south of Podgorodny, and they're moving from the north to the south, trying to get the central part on, let's say, on the east side of Bakhmut River. And the Russians moves all over the front line, from the north, from the east, from the south. Furthermore, something very interesting happens in the vicinity of Klishchiivka. The Russians, when talking about this bridgehead, they try to develop their offensive operation at least in 3 directions. Let's return back to the Western sources map, and now we're talking about this area, this Klishchiivka, these trenches that the Russians established control. And when talking about this area, the Russians are trying to move along this canal in direction of the road N32. This is the first movement, and we understand this movement. So it's when talking about the global scope, the Russians are moving in direction of Ivanovska. They want to cut supply of Ivanovska from the west, and they want to cut supply of Ivanovska from the east, and then they want to establish control over this small village. And after that, we can say about operational or even tactical encirclement of Bakhmut, because from Ivanovska the Russians will be able to establish physical control, fire control over the only road that Ukrainians can use to supply Bakhmut. Furthermore, the Russians are trying to develop their bridgehead on let's say west side of this canal, on the west side from Kurdyumovka. As you can see, according to the Russian sources map, they're showing some icons, and the Russians pushes in direction of Alexandra Shulgin, in direction of Belaya Gora, in direction of Deliivka, and direction of Dachina, in direction of Druzhba. So they want to establish, and they're planning to move, and I believe that the next months they are going to take control over the area between the railroad and Kurdyumovka, even maybe earlier. They will be able to do this even earlier. Furthermore, today the mayor or the head of military authorities of Gorlovka published some information that the Russians started movement on the northwest part of Gorlovka. The Russians put some kind of icon in this area showing where maybe approximately the Russians are moving, but I believe that this icon shouldn't be there. I believe that the Russians are moving in direction the bloc Druzhba, as we discussed many times. I'm not sure that it's highly unlikely that the Russians are able to penetrate these fortifications, the same fortification as in Avdiivka. The Ukrainians were started building this fortification in 2014, so it's very difficult to storm this area in the front, but it is much easier to attack Druzhba from the north between. And the Russians these days are trying to attack all these blue lines, all these fortifications from the north. So they are trying to attack these fortifications from the back. And I believe that they are able to do this. Wagners are very professional stormtroopers. I think that they will take control over this territory. So the thing that the Russians want to achieve is to establish their bridgehead along the railroad, along the canal, and to have very nice bridgehead between towns like Chasov Yar, Konstantinovka, Donetsk, New York agglomeration. Of course, after that, they will start New York encirclement operation. As you can see, there have some movements in Avdiivka. So the front lines become less. The front line becomes every single day less and less. And when talking about the Russians, every single day it becomes much more easy to attack, to encircle, and to push the Ukrainians from many sides, and this is exactly what we can see these days. Furthermore, when talking about the north part of this area, the Russians pushes in direction of Veselaya, the Russians are storming Razdolovka, the Russians are trying to establish control over Nikolaevka. So all these towns are under Russian attack, and I believe that we can start counting even hours before this fortification line is going to fall. Because it's very difficult to supply and support. The only support that Ukrainians can allow themselves is support from Siversk, but to support Siversk they need to make a very big hook from Sloviansk. So it's not an easy job to protect the north line, and I believe that these days the Ukrainians try to solve a puzzle how to evacuate forces from Siversk, or maybe how to slow down the Russians. But for now, I believe they don't have any decision, and the only decision they have is to win as much as possible time before they receive the Western weapon, and maybe they think that Western weapons are going to help them and are going to fix all their issues all over the front line. When talking about Liman area, the Russians were attacking Ukrainians all over the front line, in the forest or near Serebryanka, in Yampolovka, in this town they were attacking the Ukrainians in Vishnyovo. And as a result of those clashes, the Ukrainians lost around 50 soldiers, 3 armored vehicles, and another M777 artillery system. When talking about Kupinsk front line, the Ukrainians lost another 2 M77 artillery systems, 1 howitzer Gvozdika. The Ukrainians lost 25 soldiers, 3 armored vehicles, and the Russians were attacking the Ukrainians in the area of Sinkovka, Petropavlovka, Sinkovka, Novoselovska. But when talking about this area, without any changes on the ground. When talking about the situation in the global scope, I believe that these days everybody in the Western countries are talking just about one thing, about upcoming greatest Russian offensive operation. And nobody knows where exactly the Russians are planning to start. Or the Russians are planning to start on Orekhov, or the Russians want to make a penetration process, penetrate the Ukrainians' defense in Vuhledar and just to encircle the Ukrainians in Marinka, just to solve the issues and problems around Donetsk, or the Russians want to encircle the Ukrainian forces that located in north of LPR and DPR, so on Kupinsk-Liman front line, or maybe the Russians want to complete the story with Bakhmut. A lot of options, a lot of places where the Russians are able to attack. The only thing that the Western countries know for sure, that the next upcoming greatest Russian offensive, the main goal of the upcoming Russian offensive operation is to return control or establish control over DPR. So the Russians, according to the Western sources, wants to complete their main goal of this special operation and to liberate, according to the Russians, the northwest part of DPR. So we'll see. We'll see, because there are still a lot of questions about Zaporizhzhia, there are still a lot of questions about Kherson, but for now, just to destroy and reduce the Ukrainian army that located on the northwest of Donetsk Oblast or DPR. And that's it for today. Military Summary channel reminds to condemn any violence in Ukraine. Thank you for watching. Subscribe to my channel, put your likes, join my Patreon, and have a good day. Bye bye.